Deal Breakers, a Crystal Creek sweet, small-town romance novella by Heather Tullis. Chapter 1. Colette Bunker's hopes to fly home that evening were being pounded with every icy snowflake that hit the airport window. Standing inside the warm terminal, she watched another airplane taxi toward her through the swirling snow and wondered how long air traffic control would allow planes to land in this February blizzard. Denver had probably not been the smartest place for her to transfer through today, considering the growing strength of the wind and the storm warning alerts coming through her phone. Was there a chance she would continue home to Kansas City before morning? The doors closed behind the flight heading to LA, the flight she had gotten off of less than an hour ago, and now the plane was heading back there again. She kind of wished she was on it. Looking out at the snow surrounding the Denver airport made LA seem pretty fantastic. She saw the plane pull out and start taxiing down the runway, and then the other plane that had arrived from Wichita pulled into the gate. By the time people began streaming through the doors into the terminal, the snow had thickened significantly, so Colette could no longer see the end of the runway. This was not a good sign. A deep male voice came over the loudspeaker. "Attention passengers. Due to the rising storm, all incoming flights are being rerouted. Outgoing flights are being canceled or delayed. Hopefully we'll have more information for you soon. Thank you for your patience as we deal with the weather." Perfect. Just what I need. It had been a long week in LA, land of the perfect weather. One would think that being somewhere with clear skies and friendly beaches would have made her time in the city fly by, but Colette had spent the whole time wishing she were home with her sister Sarah, who was suffering from chemo treatments for breast cancer. It had been terrible timing to be out of town to train a West Coast company's accounting department, but since the training had been scheduled for 6 weeks and her schedule was full for the next couple of months, Colette hadn't been able to get out of it. She tasted the spearmint gum on her tongue, smelled the baby sitting behind her. Apparently someone was due for a diaper change, and heard the chattering of unhappy voices surrounding her. Several people talked about renting a car to finish the drive home. Others talked about getting a hotel room. Driving in this storm was definitely not on her to-do list, no matter how badly she wanted to be home. The weather might be better once she cleared the valley, but crossing what in good weather was 10 hours of open prairie by herself in a storm was not a great idea. Colette really hoped it didn't come down to that. Maybe the storm would let up in an hour or two, and she would still be able to find a way out of here. Positive thinking, it was what her sister kept repeating. Some shaman of a natural doctor kept telling Sarah that positive thinking was half the battle. Though Colette didn't really believe it, she was willing to support Sarah in whatever she needed to make the struggle easier. "Attention passengers, cancellations are showing up on the schedule for flights that are leaving soon. Please contact a service representative for your airline to receive notifications about your flight." There was a communal groan from the crowd, and though her flight wasn't scheduled to leave for over an hour, Colette had the funny feeling that a major delay, at least, was in the plans. She glanced at the people coming off the flight in the next gate over and wondered where that plane was supposed to be going next. She sent a quick text to Sarah to let her know that she wouldn't be arriving on schedule and to call when she was up to it. Next, Colette called the shuttle service she had used to let them know that her flight was likely delayed, but that she would let them know when she had specifics on her return. She looked up as the last of the passengers exited the plane, followed by the pilots. She glanced back down at her phone, then her brain finally processed what she'd seen, and she looked up again at one of the final passengers. Oh my, that was Drew Beck. Her heart sped up while she studied him, not sure if she believed it. He walked in her direction, though his gaze was definitely elsewhere. He was 6'1" and as lean as she remembered from college, though his face had softened a little. Had it really been more than a decade since she saw him last? His dirty blonde hair was spiked up in front, and his brown eyes tracked across the crowd, passing right over her. A couple seconds clicked by, and then his gaze moved back to focus on her. He stopped in the middle of the walkway, staring at her. Emotions raced across Drew's face. Surprise, recognition, confusion, and then it was all wiped away as if he had no more feeling for her than anyone else in the room. Their gazes held and people streamed around him. Unable to let it end there without at least trying to bridge the huge gap she had caused between them in college, Colette lifted a hand and waved. That seemed to break him from his frozen state, and he walked up to her. "Hi, Colette. Wow. You're the last person I expected to see today." Ditto, like 100 times over. "Yeah, did you hear about the cancellations?" She didn't know what to say to him, how to act, so she tried treating him like anyone she might have had a glancing acquaintance with in the past, though it had most definitely been more than that. "Yes, they told us before we even started to get off the plane. I've been here about an hour. I have, or rather I had a 3-hour layover. It sounds like it'll be a lot longer." He adjusted the gray carry-on over his shoulder. Yeah, it could be a while." Though it felt like her heart might explode from racing so hard, Colette sucked up her insecurities and asked, "So, since we're going to be here a while, you want to grab some dinner and catch up?" She needed to ease into a discussion about the past, wondering if he regretted the way things had ended between them as much as she did. Not that she could come right out and ask him that, but she wished she could. He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I could eat." He waited while she slung her purse across her body and grabbed her carry-on's handle. They walked across the mosaic tile art, hooking a left at the enormous sculpture of a railroad track, a map of the earth, and some tall blue things. She had no idea what the sculptures were supposed to represent, to the junction where several terminals met. "Are you heading on a trip or going home?" Colette asked after a strained moment. "Heading out. My brother Keith is getting married." Drew shifted to his other foot. "He's not in Kansas?" His family had lived in the Wichita area practically since the Mayflower landed in America. She'd liked Keith, though he'd been a scrawny high school kid when she'd last seen him. "No, he and Stacy are in Oregon. I'm supposed to be his best man." "Oh no, that's awful that you're stuck here. I hope you can get there in time." "Yeah." After another strained moment, Colette asked another question, hoping he would thaw enough for a real conversation. "Where are you living?" "Wichita. I'm teaching high school chemistry. How about you?" Colette had wondered if he had returned there after school, but hadn't heard. "You won't believe it, but I'm living in a little town outside Kansas City." It was worlds away from Milwaukee, where she had grown up. His surprise melted a little more reserve in his eyes, and he leaned in. "Really? What brought you to the Sunflower State?" Relieved that the awkwardness was softening, Colette let her shoulders relax. This was still Drew. She may not know him now, but she had known him once, and he didn't seem that different from before, at least not on the surface. "Two things. First, Sarah, you remember my sister, right?" When Drew nodded that he did, she continued. "Her husband, Bill, started working there, and I wanted to be close to her. Bill helped me get hired at his company, which is where I still work 6 years later." "Anything I would have heard of?" They stepped off the escalators and entered the food court. The crowds were thick since no flights were leaving anytime soon. They looked at the selections. Pizza, burgers, Chinese, and Mexican restaurants circled the seating area. There was definitely nothing out of the ordinary. "Tacos?" he asked. "They're still the best." She couldn't help but remember all of the times they had gone on a late taco run to fuel their studying. "Another thing that hasn't changed about you," Drew said while they worked down the line of restaurants. When they stopped at the end of the line at Taco Bell, Colette asked, "What else do you think hasn't changed about me?" His gaze moved over her features. "I swear you don't look like 10 years have passed. Did you time travel or something?" Colette chuckled, flattered. "You have a faulty memory, but I'll forgive it this time. You might be surprised at some of the things that have changed about me." "Oh, are you married with 5 kids and vacation every winter in Maui?" "Maui." She sighed longingly. "Doesn't that sound heavenly? But no, no marriage, no kids, no Maui. Maybe this spring I'll have to make that one happen, though." If Sarah responded well to her treatments and was able to travel. Maybe Colette could get tickets for the two of them and Bill to enjoy something beautiful after such a hard, miserable winter. I'm surprised you haven't married. What happened between you and Nick? Drew looked over her shoulder rather than at her face, as if he didn't want to see her expression when she responded. Colette pulled a face, kicking herself for that particular decision for at least the thousandth time. Nick was the biggest dating mistake I ever made. She stopped short of admitting that she'd realized too late she'd screwed up choosing him over Drew. What happened? You were so in love with him once. There was more than a hint of bitterness in his voice. She bit her lip for a moment, then squared her shoulders. Look, could we table all of that for a little while? Drew nodded. Maybe that would be best. I'm not sure it would make a difference to hash it out at this point anyway. Colette sighed, searched for the conversational thread before she had derailed it, and grasped onto it again. I've dated several people since, 3 of them seriously. One actually made it all the way to an engagement, but thankfully I came to my senses before too late. So it's just me. No dogs or cats or anything? He asked. I used to have guppies. Yeah, I know. Laugh all you like, but they were fun. I travel too much now, though. She actually missed coming home to her fish at night and the sound of the bubbler filling the air while she drifted off to sleep. Drew kept grinning. You travel for work? More than I'd like sometimes. They reached the front of the line and each ordered and paid, then slid to the side to wait for their tacos. A few minutes later, Drew found 2 seats at a bar where they could sit to eat. So, what is it you do? Drew asked when they had each eaten part of their dinner. Ah, and this is the part you won't believe. I'm a trainer. I teach classes on how to use my company's accounting software. The taco he'd been about to bite into hung in the air while he stared. Wait, like standing up in front of a class and teaching them, as in public speaking? Mind blown. Colette laughed. It was almost like old times. She had forgotten how much she loved being in Drew's company.
Chapter 2. Drew couldn't believe what he was hearing, or what he was seeing. Colette, the woman he had been head over heels for in college, before she dumped him to date someone else. He had cut her off at the time, unable to watch her date the jerk she had picked over him. The break had been necessary for his peace of mind, but he'd come to wish that he hadn't done such a thorough job of it. He couldn't imagine the girl he had once known standing in front of a class full of people. You teach people? That's absolutely fantastic. I thought you might end up sitting behind a desk where you didn't have to interact with anyone face to face. This was an exaggeration. She was good with people. She just had an issue with stage fright. The poetry class they had taken together fall semester his senior year, her freshman year, had been proof of that. It hadn't helped that they'd had to write their own poem and read it to the class. That had nearly been enough to do him in, and he wasn't afraid of public speaking like she had been. Apparently, she'd gotten over it. How did you start out terrified of talking to groups and end up teaching? Though he hadn't been sure if he was happy to see her at first, the anger and frustrations of the past had been melting away as they spoke. He still had plenty of questions, but they had a little time to get their bearings before picking at that sore. For the moment, he only wanted to know what had happened with her. What had happened to them? Maybe it would help him stop having the same kinds of problems over and over. He always seemed to pick women who were more concerned about something else in their lives than they were about their relationship with him. Colette tossed back her shoulder-length brown hair, which was smooth and cut in a way that framed her face perfectly. After the poetry fiasco, Sarah challenged me to overcome my fear of public speaking. I challenged her back to get over her fear of horses, and the next day I looked up my local Toastmasters group. And just like that you were cured? He asked, knowing it couldn't possibly have been that easy. Her fear had been real, definitely more than the average person's nervousness. Not even. I started out with small things, learning techniques and practicing short readings, and then I eventually graduated up from there. I was still nervous for a long time, but after several years I overcame my terror, and here I am, teaching classes practically every week. I admit, I still stumbled over my words the first year that I taught the class, but the practice has made me much more confident. It helps that I've had so much practice now. He found her every bit as amazing as before. And how did Sarah do with her challenge? Colette chuckled. It's a work in progress. She is doing better with horses, though. Her husband really wants to get some to ride, but he won't do it until she's comfortable around them. We almost got her onto one last summer. He must be very patient. That was a quality Drew was trying to improve in himself, so he admired it when he saw it in others. He's the best. She's lucky to have him. But he's not lucky to have her? Oh no, he's totally lucky to have her. She's practically perfect, other than her weird horse phobia, which isn't that big of a deal, really. She pretty much never complains, no matter how bad things get. They did an excellent job of picking each other. It seems that some people get super lucky while others, well, not so much. She looked up and their gazes met. No words were needed. Drew saw understanding in her eyes. He'd missed the connection that they had found so easily. He broke the silence after a long moment. How is she, your sister, besides being scared of horses? Colette bit her lip. Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer about 6 weeks ago. She had the lumpectomy and has done 2 rounds of chemo. She had her second treatment this week when I was in LA. I hate being away from her while she's sick. He slid his hand over hers on the table, compassion softening some of the rough edges of their past. That must be hard for you. It is. It doesn't help that her husband has to work all weekend because of a product release. Sarah and I had Valentine's Day plans. Really? What did you have on the docket? Something anti-V-Day-ish? From what he'd heard, 2 women together on Valentine's evening usually resulted in some kind of guy bashing. Nope. We were going to watch a movie or two with plenty of action, order pizza, and stuff ourselves with cheesecake. That's not anti-V-Day? She crumpled the wrapper from her taco and opened a second one. No, because it's not about woman power. It won't be a sappy movie. It'll be something with plenty of cars blowing up or other action and really fantastic food. This year, we plan to rewatch I Am Not a Serial Killer. Drew laughed in surprise. Wow, your taste in movies has expanded. Thank you, I try. Colette wondered if she actually would get home in time to see that show with her sister. When do you think the first flights will be going out, and where they'll be going? He tipped his head. I don't know, but it probably won't be too much longer. We'll get you back home. I know, I'm just impatient. So how often do you travel? He changed the subject, seeing that she needed a change of subject. It was strange how well he remembered the nuances of her expression. She let out a sigh, but appeared to relax a little. About half the time. I go out to companies to train people, or they send people to me and I work with groups from the home office. It's nice to be able to get out and see a lot of places, but it also gives me time to do laundry and settle in between. How's your family doing? They finished their dinner while they talked, the crowds rotating around them while people finished eating and others arrived. The loudspeaker clicked on, then a female voice said, Attention all passengers, all flights for the rest of the day have been canceled. We will not be able to have any flights in or out until the snow lets up. Contact your airline for more information or to reschedule your trip. That was not the kind of news Drew had been hoping for, though he couldn't complain too loudly about who he'd been stranded with. Oh man, Keith is not going to be happy about this. I knew I should have taken the later flight that routed through Phoenix, Colette agreed. We better see if we can get hotel rooms before they're all gone. The airport floor didn't strike him as the most comfortable place to sleep. Too late, the woman beside them volunteered. My husband has been calling around for the past 20 minutes, and we can't find anything open. Those who do have openings aren't running their shuttles to the airport because of the storm. Even the taxis aren't coming out here anymore. Rental cars? Colette asked, though she looked skeptical. Long gone. It sounds like they were all gone within 10 minutes of the first word of delays. The woman sighed deeply. It looks like the rest of us will have a long night in the airport. Perfect, Colette frowned. Though Drew was not happy about it, there was still a chance he could make the wedding on Saturday afternoon. It was only Thursday night, but he might miss the rehearsal dinner and bachelor party on Friday. I'm going to make some calls. Colette pulled out her phone. I know a few people. Maybe I can get a ride out of here. Drew called Keith to tell him about the weather delay. He turned back to Colette in time to see her hang up. So, any news? Nope. Looks like we're stuck here. All of the locals seem to have been smart enough to clear out already, he said, looking around the food court at the diminished crowd. I bet everyone's off staking out their chairs for the rest of the wait. We probably ought to do that too. Colette stood and dumped her garbage before returning for her suitcase. I wonder how long the food court will be open? Or the gift shops? Their eyes met and they nodded. We better stock up on a few essentials before they get picked over. Apparently, they weren't the only ones with that idea. The lines at the cash register in the first gift shop they passed held at least a dozen people each. They moved to the next, and Drew noticed the sodas were already getting low. They headed in and split up to gather the necessary items. He snatched up the last 2 jerky sticks, a package of trail mix, 2 packages of M&Ms, a large water bottle, and on a whim, a pack of face cards. Colette stepped into line behind him, and they compared purchases. She had grabbed the latest cozy mystery by Heather Justison, a magazine on gardening, a box of crackers and tub of dip, and some gummy worms. Gummy worms, huh? Always and forever. M&Ms? Her eyebrow lifted at him. No reading material? I have a book in my bag already. When did you get into gardening? And since when do you not have a book on you? I have a book, but it's almost finished. I decided to get a backup. She glanced at the garden magazine. I wanted something different than the book in case my attention span gets short. It was this or a hunting magazine. Slim pickings. The area where they had met was full, but they continued down the terminal and came to one gate that still had a few seats open and was not too far from the charging station. A mother about their age with 3 young children, he guessed to be between ages 7 and 3, were seated next to them. She was distracting her kids with coloring books and crayons. The youngest one whined in her arms while she tried to interest him in a plastic car. Drew studied all of the others around them. He would expected major storms in December and January, but the weather was already warming up a little in Kansas. You grew up in Milwaukee, he said. How long do you think this storm will last? This isn't Milwaukee. No, but Denver's, the land of the snow. Not entirely unlike Milwaukee in that way. How long do you think we'll be stuck here? Overnight? 3 days? Who knows? It could be a while. My phone says it's supposed to keep snowing at least another 12 hours, maybe 16. But if the snow lightens up the last few hours of the storm, we could get lucky and get out while it's still the weekend. Definitely not great news then. So you're saying I should ration my M&Ms just in case? Definitely. You can even give them to me for safekeeping if you're afraid you might eat them too quickly. Colette shot him a sunny smile. I'm sure they would be very safe in your hands. She might be somewhat addicted to gummy worms, but chocolate was a close second. He didn't plan to chance it. The safest, Colette grinned. So, tell me absolutely everything you've done and everywhere you've gone since we talked last. Everything? That encompassed a lot of topics. Yes, if we have 3 days, then there will be plenty of time for us to discuss every detail of what we've been up to. You're on. He told her about finishing his degree at University of California, Riverside and his student teaching. He didn't mention his lack of a social life after she had chosen Nick instead of him. Instead, he asked a question that had passed through his head several times over the years. How long did you stay with Nick before kicking him to the curb? Her head swiveled in surprise. What makes you think I broke up with him instead of the other way around? Their truce was still tentative, so he was careful about his tone, wanting this to be a friendly conversation rather than a big fight. I knew him better than you did at the time. I knew what a jerk he was and the kind of person you were. You couldn't be fooled for long. Then again, I was surprised that he had managed to fool you at all. She nodded. 3 months, which was honestly about a month longer than things between us should have lasted. I think I was trying to convince myself that I hadn't totally screwed up by picking him over you, but I knew better. Staying with him didn't make it better. It only made me miserable for longer than I needed to be. It was actually a relief to get it out in the open, even though it made the conversation awkward and uncomfortable again. That was a rough year. I missed you. I missed you too. I totally screwed up with you, and I'm sorry, but you seem to be doing well now. I mean, you have a good life, right? He couldn't argue that point. I absolutely have a great life. I love teaching, I have great students, and I coach girls lacrosse every year for the school. Practices start next week. Our team is phenomenal, and I'm living in my hometown, which definitely makes me happy. I'm really glad. I learned a few things from Nick myself. Him making fun of my fear of public speaking was what actually pushed me to join Toastmasters. Sarah knew that he had worn me down, that I needed self-confidence, and that facing my fear was only one way for me to conquer it. That's why she invented the bet. Thought I didn't realize it at the time. They talked about their jobs and family trips, his first year of coaching lacrosse, and her first year of working for her current employer. When 10 o'clock rolled around, they decided they were hungry and decided to take turns with one person ordering for both of them while the other saved their spot. They flipped a coin, and Colette lost. As she walked off and Drew stretched out his cramping legs, he wondered if maybe she had actually won, and not the other way around. He needed to move around for a while. He glanced over at the little girl who was a year or two older than his niece back home. He also had a nephew who was a year younger. He could only imagine how difficult it had been for this mother to manage all 3 kids for the past few hours. The boys were already sacked out on the floor. He hoped for their mom's sake that they slept well. "Is she your girlfriend?" the 5-ish-year-old girl beside him asked. "Hannah," her mom said. "Hush, don't pry." "It's fine," Drew assured her. "No, Colette's not my girlfriend. We used to date a little, a very long time ago." "How long?" his tiny companion asked. "Before you or your brothers were born." "Wow, that was a long time." She nodded her chubby little face. "But you're friends now?" "Yeah, I think we are." Or at least they were headed that way, which was a nice thing to be able to say again. It had been a long time since he'd been able to consider Colette his friend, though back then he had wanted much more. He'd missed that. He looked out the window and watched the snow swirl and drift and fall. Periodically, he saw a snow truck clearing the tarmac. It was a losing battle, but he supposed it would be easier to clear the runway for real when the snow stopped, if the trucks kept it from accumulating too much first. "Where are you guys from?" Drew asked the mom a few minutes later. "New York. We were going to Arizona." "I bet Arizona is great right about now." "Yeah, my sister sent a text this afternoon to gloat that her kids were out running on the lawn in their shorts." Meanwhile, you're stuck trying to keep your kids entertained in an airport. There's always that one sibling who has to rub things in. That one sibling used to be him, but he'd gotten over himself. "Mostly. I'm Drew. Teresa. Where are you headed?" Drew told her about the wedding in about 40 hours and the activities he was probably going to miss. He asked the kids about school and their favorite show. By the time Colette finally returned with their late snack, he was able to introduce the women as if they were old friends. They snacked on fries and apple wedges, and Drew offered to get something for Teresa if she wanted anything. "No thanks. I think the kids have had enough to eat tonight, but I might take you up on it in the morning." She yawned, but seemed determined to stay awake. "I'm going to stretch my legs for a few minutes," Drew told Colette. "I'll be back." He studied the people around him as he walked through the halls. A lot of travelers had fallen asleep. The airport had brought in cots, but there weren't enough to go around, so there were still quite a few people sacked out on the semi-padded seats or the floor. On the way back, he helped an older couple with their bags and filled a water bottle for a kid who couldn't reach the dispenser button. There were a lot of stranded passengers, but other than a few grumbles, most people seemed to be taking it in stride. He wondered how long that would last. Security guards roamed up and down the terminals, keeping an eye on things. Drew greeted one. "Hey, how are things going?" "As well as we can expect, I guess. Things are quieting down. The restaurants are going to be closing soon for the night, since they can't get new workers in to cover the night shift." "Good to know. What time will they open again?" "By breakfast, I'm sure. I've never worked here when everyone has been snowed in." He shrugged. Will they have enough food if they can't get deliveries? It was a joke, mostly, because the food vendors served a lot of people every day here, and surely would have plenty to last a couple days. It depends on how long this lasts, but I wouldn't worry about it yet. Thanks. Despite being admonished to not worry, the conversation left Drew slightly unsettled. When he returned to their group, he noticed that Teresa had fallen asleep with her children gathered around her in the corner, and Colette was on the phone. I know. I'm sorry to put you in such a bad position at the last minute. I promised to let you know. Tell her everything's fine. Yes, really, I ran into an old friend. Okay, talk to you tomorrow. Sorry, Bill. She looked unhappy when she ended the call. Who was that? Drew tried to act only mildly curious. Sarah's husband. He called to see if I was going to be home tomorrow. Colette's brows furrowed. How was your ramble? It was good to stretch. I talked to a security guard. He pitched his voice low so no one else would be able to hear. He adjusted their things to provide a little extra buffer for Teresa and her kids from everyone else, and to keep all of their things beyond the reach of sticky fingers. While he worked, he told Colette about his conversation with the security guard. I hope it doesn't become a problem. Maybe the snow will slow down soon, she suggested. Maybe. He doubted it. This could be a long wait if the storm didn't let up by noon like they expected.
Chapter 3. Colette read for a little while after Drew settled on the padded seat beside her, but she was starting to get sleepy. She turned to find him fully engrossed in his book. It seemed unreal to be with him now, here. Drew met her gaze. Looks like a lot of people are hunkering down for bed. How are you holding up? I'm good for a while yet. You can lean here if you want. He patted his shoulder. Colette was tempted, even though she didn't want to fall asleep yet. It was too nice to be with him. I may take you up on that later, but I was thinking maybe we could try a game of slapjack for now. A smile stole onto his face. You know me. I'm always up for a game of slapjack. Only we have to be quiet enough that we don't wake up the kids. Drew reached into his bag for his pack of cards. They sat cross-legged on the floor facing each other as he started mixing them up and then dealt their hands. I haven't played this since college, Colette admitted. Not since she'd last played it with him, actually. It was his favorite game. Well, then, be prepared to be creamed. You always were a big talker. Fine, if I win the first round, you have to share your gummy worms with me. She feigned shock. No, not my gummy worms. Pick something else. I don't want anything else. It's gummy or bust. Unless you don't think you can beat me. This guy. This was the man she had liked so much in college. She loved the competitive look in his eyes. It was worth her gummy worms, she decided. Okay, you're on. It didn't take long for her to get right back into the groove, and though he won in the end, it didn't happen nearly as fast as she had expected. You earned it, she said when she pulled the gummy worms from her bag. He waved the candy away. How about you hold on to them? I'll claim my winnings tomorrow. I don't have any way to keep my half overnight. Colette yawned. It was almost midnight in Kansas, and it was definitely past her bedtime. Drew pushed himself back up onto his chair and patted the seat beside him. Come on up and rest. You know you need to get some sleep. If you don't take your gummy worms now, you might not be able to before we get out of here tomorrow. That thought made her surprisingly sad. I seriously doubt it'll be that early. His eyes narrowed and he pointed at her. Don't try eating them all just to keep me from my share. How did you guess I was thinking about that? I remember how you are. Colette chuckled and boosted herself back up beside him, glancing over at Teresa to see how she was handling the kids. The kids were all sleeping soundly. Colette tipped her head against Drew's shoulder. They were facing the windows where snow continued to twist past their view. She thought of the wedding he would be missing if he didn't get out of here tomorrow. Why do people want to have their anniversary on Valentine's Day? Keith jokes that it's so he only has to remember one day to give his wife a gift, and that it'll save them money, but I'm pretty sure it's because it's supposed to be romantic. The tone in his voice made her lift her head and scrutinize him. You don't think Valentine's Day is about romance? No, Valentine's Day is about making people feel guilty if they forget, or crappy because they don't have someone, or awful because their relationship isn't all happy and la-da-da tiptoe through the tulips. You don't need a special day designated by greeting card companies to be romantic. Romance is remembering the person every day, not just once per year. Romance isn't about the big gestures. That's not to say that big gestures from time to time aren't great, but that's not what makes a romance work. It's the little expressions of love that keeps a marriage working over a lifetime. That's what I see when I look at happy relationships that last. The breath stopped in Colette's throat. How was it possible that this man was still single? That's completely right, she said. Exactly. I'm glad people love Valentine's Day and enjoy it, but I think the holiday can be bad, every bit as much as it can be good. She tipped her head back to look at him. You're pretty amazing. His lips curved slightly, and he slid his hand over hers. I wish you'd figured that out 10 years ago. I did, just a little too late. She opened her mouth to say so, but then remembered the hurt and anger in his expression when things had ended between them, and the discomfort it had caused during their discussion earlier. Did she want to dredge that up already? Then again, maybe discussing the past wouldn't cause problems after all. Go to sleep, he said. It's going to be a long night. As her eyes drifted closed, she saw the yellow blinking light of the snowplow pass by the window again. Chapter 4. Mom, I'm hungry. The little boy's voice woke Colette from her fitful night's rest. She lifted her head from what turned out to be Drew's lap and looked up at him. He had put his arm up on the back of the chair and propped his head against it. His other hand created a pool of warmth on her waist. His eyelashes fluttered open, exposing brown eyes, and he sucked in a deep breath. Good morning, beautiful, she teased him. I should be the one to say that. How did you sleep? She twisted her head from side to side, working out the kinks in her neck. Not great. How about you? Better than I expected. Not nearly as well as you did. Drew rubbed his neck and stretched his back. I'm sorry. Having me take up half your space probably didn't help. I didn't mind. Do you want me to see if the restaurants are open? That's probably a good idea. I'll hang here with our things. She would need a bathroom break soon, but at the moment she was doing okay. She brushed the hair back from her face and realized her appearance could probably use a touch-up. She opened her suitcase and pulled out her makeup case. Oh yeah, she was as far from beautiful as she could get. Her mascara was badly smeared and her hair was a mess. Colette pulled out a comb and straightened the hair first, and then cleaned up her face and fixed her makeup. She put the comb away, and not wanting to wake her sister with a call if she was asleep, sent Sarah a text message asking for an update on how she was feeling. It was frustrating being so far away when her sister was probably sick. Chemo had been extra rough this time. Bill had rearranged his work schedule to be there almost full time while Colette worked, but this delay in her trip home meant she'd left them in the lurch. Colette watched the snow pelting against the windows. A quick glance at the weather app on her phone indicated it would be at least a few more hours before the storm dissipated. She hoped the weatherman was right that it would end today. She put her phone away and looked back up in time to see Drew returning, empty-handed. He shook his head. No food? One is open, but chow mein for breakfast is just wrong. Two of the restaurants apparently stayed open after all the others closed and ran out of food a couple hours ago. Most of the restaurants have posted that they'll open again at 7. You can hold out for another hour, right? Yes, I'm glad it's only a delay. I could imagine the revolt if they run out of food before we can leave the airport. Tell me about it. He plopped down beside her. Did you notice the snow outside? Yeah. Did it stop at all last night? Doubtful. But I'm hungry, the little boy said again. Teresa sighed. I can't buy you any food until the food court opens again. I'm sorry. Hey, do you want some trail mix? Drew dug into his duffel and pulled out the bag he had bought the previous afternoon. Most of it was still in the package. I think there's enough to go around. You don't have to, Teresa demurred, but Colette could see that she was tired and probably hungry, too. He wouldn't offer it if it was going to be a problem. Colette took the package and opened it, pouring some into each of the kids' hands. How did you guys sleep? The kids all answered, though the older boy was less groggy than the rest. Colette shared some trail mix with Teresa, poured a very small amount in her own hand, and then passed what was left back to Drew. Prosody. Thankfully, it had been a rather large bag, so it wasn't entirely empty. When the oldest boy finished, he said, "I'm still hungry. Josh, be nice and tell them thank you. We'll have breakfast later." Teresa turned to Colette with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, you're very kind to share with us." "You're welcome," Drew reassured her. Colette focused on the boy. "That wasn't breakfast. It was only a snack to keep your stomach from hurting while we're waiting for the restaurants to open. It won't be too much longer." "Hey, do you guys like to play Go Fish?" Drew asked, pulling out his pack of cards. "Yeah," the older boy said. "We both like Go Fish." "Perfect. Colette and I like it a lot too. Come sit on the floor with us." It was a little cramped to squeeze two adult-sized bodies and two kids onto the floor between the rows of chairs, but they managed to get down and play several rounds of the game while they waited for breakfast time. Colette loved watching Drew interact with the kids, joking with them and distracting them from the fact that they couldn't eat for a while. He was good with kids, even though they were much younger than the teens he taught at school. She wondered if he had experience dealing with small children, or if it was natural. When people started returning to the terminal area with bags of food, they finished the game and Drew stood. "How about if I go grab us all some breakfast? Any requests?" "Pancakes," the older boy demanded. "Eggs," the girl added. Teresa reached into her purse and pulled out a $5 bill. She looked apologetic. "I hadn't planned to buy 2 meals at the airport." "No problem," Drew said. "My treat. What about you and the kid there?" "Oh, I can't." Teresa looked embarrassed. Colette caught Drew's imploring look. She took the seat beside Teresa. "Look, Drew makes a ton of money at his job. Seriously, he's wildly overpaid, and he wants to help you. He won't miss it, and your kids are hungry. You need breakfast too if you're going to keep up with them. Let him help you." She hoped he hadn't told Teresa that he taught high school, or her excuse would never fly. Tears pricked the woman's eyes and she nodded. "Thank you. Eggs, or egg sandwiches, pancakes, whatever you can get. My kids are equal opportunity eaters of breakfast foods." "Good to know," Colette said. "I'm going to fill my water bottle." She followed Drew away from their things, now that they had gotten to know Teresa enough to trust her to keep an eye on them for a couple minutes. "I'm loaded, huh?" Drew asked. "She wouldn't have accepted if she thought you were a starving schoolteacher. Besides, lunch will be more expensive to buy than breakfast, and I'll handle that one." Drew stopped and looked at her, fun shining in his eyes. "You are something else. I've missed you, Colette." He touched her face and then moved away, heading for the food court. Colette felt her pulse jump at his touch, grinning as she went to fill her water bottle. If it weren't for Sarah, she would hope the snow never stopped falling. "Blue or red?" Colette asked Drew. She leaned back in her seat, her head tipped near his. "Blue." "For me too." "Venice or London?" Drew asked. "Ooh, tough one. London." "Really? I'm all about Venice." They were seated in the terminal chairs, which were growing increasingly less comfortable, passing the time and watching the snowplows clear the tarmac. At least the wind has calmed down. "I admit, Venice is pretty amazing. I had a great time there." "Nuts in your chocolate or toffee?" she asked. "Toffee. When did you go to Venice?" 3 years ago, I took a 2-week cruise of the Mediterranean. It was incredible. I also prefer toffee." Colette had an armful of sleeping toddler. Teresa had taken the older two kids for a walk around the terminal, to go up and look at the tile mosaics from the second-floor railing and to get some of their wiggles out. Lunch was already past, and the natives were restless. The good news was that the snow had finally stopped, and the plows were actually making some headway. And Colette and Drew were whiling away the time learning more about each other. It might not give them deep insights into each other's souls, but it was interesting. Though she was glad that they lived in the same region, at least Kansas City and Wichita were still several hours apart, so managing a relationship would be difficult. That was if he even wanted a relationship with her after this was over. They hadn't talked about that at all. though she felt they were growing closer with every hour. The specter of their past hung between them like a wedge. "One kid or two?" she asked. "Four." Colette turned to him. "Four? That's a lot of kids." "Not that many, and I like kids." He grinned over at Teresa's children. "I think one is way too lonely, and two is not enough. With three, one might get elbowed out sometimes and feel alone, so I'm all about four." "I suppose your wife would have some say in the matter." He grinned. "Yes, my theoretical wife would totally have a say about whether we had 4 or 5 kids." "5? Unthinkable. See, I knew you would agree. The more the merrier." Colette poked him in the side. "I'm surprised you're teaching high school instead of kindergarten if you like little kids that much. I like all ages of humans. I'm no respecter of age." "Good to know. Ageism is totally wrong." She tried to wrap her head around his plans. "Seriously, 5, that's a lot of kids." "It is, and I'm only half serious about that. I wouldn't be against it, but I'd be happy to start with one and see how it goes." "I'm sure your theoretical future wife will appreciate that." Another snowplow came into view, pushing a load of snow to their left. "Looks like they're going to actually get the area cleared for takeoff before long." The snow had stopped nearly an hour earlier, and a lot of the heavy snow had finally been cleared. The wind had died back to a more reasonable amount as well. A giant brushing truck followed a plow, headed for one of the runways. "It'll probably take a while to get everyone who is stranded back in the air," Drew said. "Assuming we're both here, we could watch a movie tonight. I have my tablet, we have free Wi-Fi here, and we can share a pair of earbuds. Maybe get a pizza from downstairs. We could even borrow the movie of your choice with plenty of violence and gore." "Hey, my movie wasn't really that gory. I said action, not violence. They don't have to be gory to be exciting, and it's all about good triumphing over evil. What's not to love about that?" He squeezed her hand. "Absolutely nothing." Teresa returned with the 2 older kids, who were full of energy and excitement after their run around the upper floor. "Can we play some more Go Fish?" the boy asked. "How about if I let you two borrow the cards and you can play together?" Drew offered. "Okay." The kids sat on the floor and started up a game. Teresa looked like she was ready to collapse. "Hey, we've got this for a little while if you want to take a nap," Colette suggested. "I know you have to be exhausted." "I couldn't possibly. I understand why you don't want to take your eyes off your kids, but I know you didn't sleep much last night. I swear, the kids won't go 4 feet from your side without your approval." Teresa bit her bottom lip, but finally nodded. She was asleep within 2 minutes. "Wow, she was even more tired than I thought," Colette said. "It's tough being a mom. I watch my sister dealing with her 2 kids. I'm amazed every day by how much she loves them." "That's why you're so good with them. You must love having her nearby to spend time with all of them." Drew grinned. "I do. Not as much as my mom does, though. She's like super grandma, but it's great." Colette was actually a little jealous of that. Her parents were still in Milwaukee, and other than Christmas when they came to Kansas City, she rarely saw them. "So tell me more about your job," Drew asked. "What does your schedule look like these days?" Colette adjusted the boy in her arms a little and settled back to tell him more.
The airlines started some of the flights again in less than 2 hours. There were some flurries that afternoon, but the snow removal equipment seemed to handle it fine as they slowly opened more and more runways over the next few hours. Drew helped Teresa deal with the woman at the ticketing counter to get on the first possible flight going to Phoenix, even though it meant his own connection would probably be full by the time he tried to book it, and he might have to wait until morning to continue to Oregon. Thankfully, his brother's wedding wasn't scheduled until the next afternoon. There was still a slight chance Drew could make it for the ceremony. However, keeping Teresa and the kids from waiting here longer than absolutely necessary was more important. After helping them settle into seats 6 gates down for a flight that was leaving soon, Drew returned to Colette, who was watching their bags back at their seating area. "You want to join me in the melee of people jostling for the next available flight?" he asked. "I already did mine over the phone. I managed to catch the red eye. If I could have, I would have taken care of your ticket, too. I'm sorry." Colette slid her hand into his, where he had started to think it belonged. He hated the thought of her leaving and them not seeing each other again, but they hadn't discussed the future yet. He still had 6 hours with her, though, and he was going to make the most of it. He called in to see about fixing his ticketing, and he managed a flight leaving at 7 in the morning. The seating assignment did not please him, but he would make the wedding. He called Keith to let him know, and his brother sounded as relieved as Drew felt. "Now that's handled. You want to explore the airport with me?" he asked. "We still have a solid 5 hours until you have to board. We might as well." They stood and headed for the main thoroughfare. They paused to look at sculptures, studied paintings as if they were the greatest of art, and discussed the most ridiculous interpretations possible. They marveled over the huge garden growing in the middle of the airport, sampled smoothies, and tested the chocolates from the candy store. Thankfully, several delivery trucks had made it through that afternoon, so the little shops had a lot of their selection back in stock. Colette bought him some chocolate-covered cinnamon bears. "I know they aren't gummy worms, but I figured you'd like these better." "You're right." He opened the package while they walked along, Colette dragging her suitcase behind her and his bag slung over one of his shoulders. "You want one?" "No, I like fruity bears, not spicy ones, even if they are covered in chocolate." "Right, of course. What was I thinking?" Colette shook her head. "I have no idea." Drew grinned over at her. "This has been the best 24 hours I've had in a long time." She tipped her head to study him, her tone more serious than before. "Me too." The intensity in her gaze made him acutely aware that their time was limited. "Well, hey, it isn't over, is it? After all, we still have time to watch a testosterone-laden movie and eat junk food. I don't think my system can handle any more junk food. Then we'll stop and get some juice or something instead. What do you think of Dr. Pepper?" Colette lifted her brows, which made Drew laugh. He pulled her into the Jamba Juice he had seen earlier and bought her something loaded with vitamins and minerals. They found her new terminal and settled down to stream a movie while they waited for her flight. But Drew couldn't seem to let go of her hand. He'd seen the movie before, which was good, since his mind wouldn't focus on the screen. It kept veering back to Colette. Halfway through, she paused it. "I'm sorry, it's a great flick, but I'd rather talk to you while I still have the chance." Drew smiled, glad he wasn't the only one. "That makes two of us." He turned off the tablet and set it on his lap, then snuggled her under his arm. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Is this a job interview?" she asked. "Something like that." Let me think." Drew couldn't see her expression. Was she leading him on, or did she not have a plan? She'd always had a plan in college. "I guess I haven't taken the time to think about exactly what I want or where I want to be in 5 years. Shocking, I know. But I've been trying to take things as they come, and I hadn't expected this job to last. But I like it a lot. I'll keep working there for as long as it makes sense. I enjoy traveling and meeting new people all the time. On the other hand, I'm not exactly getting any younger, and I'd like to have a family. Maybe not 5 kids. She turned to look him in the eye. Drew laughed. "Would you want to stay home with the kids?" "I think kids benefit from a parent at home, but I'm not sure I could see myself as a soccer mom. I guess the important thing is that I'm open to it, depending on how things go and the circumstances surrounding whenever my husband and I get to that point. Or maybe I'll be the working parent and he'll be a stay-at-home dad." "Are you serious?" He knew it worked for some families, but wasn't sure if he would want to take time off work to raise the kids, even if his wife could make enough money for them to easily afford it. "I don't know, but it's always an option. It's a lot to figure out without any specifics. How about you? What do you see for yourself in 5 years?" Drew didn't know. He had thought he did before this weekend, but after running into her again, he felt like looking at the matter with new eyes. Upon reflection, he supposed that it wasn't a fair question. They hadn't even figured out what they wanted or didn't want from each other. Had it really only been a day since they had found each other again? His head was so full of Colette that he couldn't think straight. She had broken his heart once before. Was he ready to put his heart on the line again for her? "I want a family and a wife who wants to build a life. not one who's looking for separate lives, but using the same name. I'm not saying spouses can't have their own interests, but I want to make sure we're on the same wavelength and headed in the same direction. He realized why he had really brought up the whole discussion. He'd been brushing off echoes of the anxiety that had filled him in college when he told Colette how he felt about her, even though she had been dating Nick. No, because she had just started dating Nick. Normally, he was deliberate and thought things through, except, apparently, where she was concerned. I've been thinking that I wasn't sure what I wanted, because I've been more than a little mixed up since seeing you yesterday. The truth is that it's not complex. It's actually very simple. I still want the future I see when I look at you. When I look to the future, I think of you and me. But you broke my heart, Colette. It messed me up. So I need you to be sure that you want to pursue something with me, wherever it might lead. That it's not just the excitement of seeing each other again keeping us together. Colette opened her lips to say something more, then closed them again. I don't think we've known each other enough to be sure of what either of us really wants. She looked at him for a long moment before pursuing what had been lingering behind her eyes. I really wish I hadn't been such an idiot when it came to you in college. And I wish you hadn't turned your back on me. I understand why you did, or I tried to understand anyway. Drew brushed the hair back from her face. Me too, more than ever. But I couldn't stand to be your second choice when things imploded with Nick, and I was afraid you'd turn to me only because there was no one else there, and it wouldn't mean what I wanted it to mean. You could never be second best. The muscle of his arm contracted under her touch as he held back his immediate response to pick his words more carefully. That's nice of you to say, but we both know better. You turned your back on me the moment someone more interesting came along. Colette shook her head. That wasn't it at all. It looked that way from where I was standing. Maybe if you had stuck around a little longer instead of cutting me off, you would have learned the truth. You didn't leave me a chance to explain or reconsider. You were just gone. The one time I tracked you down, you refused to listen. You weren't the only one who was hurt, Drew. I needed you, and you wouldn't listen. You knew I didn't have anyone else, but it didn't matter. Drew stood, surprised that he was worked up about it after so long. He had told himself he was over it, but apparently not. He needed a few minutes of space to process so he could finish the conversation calmly. I need a minute. Of course you do, she muttered under her breath. What is that supposed to mean? You figure it out. He stalked down the next terminal, considering her words. Had cutting her off all those years ago been wrong? Besides the fact that it had obviously left her no one to turn to when things had ended with Nick, had it hurt himself too? By the time he made it back to Colette's parting gate 15 minutes later, he was calmer and ready to have an actual conversation. They were running out of time, and he wanted to get through this problem before it was too late. Otherwise, this could end up in the pile of regrets he already lived with. It was hard watching you fawn over Nick, he said when he reached her again. I didn't know how to deal with it, and I reacted badly. The look of irritation in her eyes hadn't subsided while he'd calmed down. It was hard being torn between you two. I didn't think you saw me as anything but a friend until after I started dating him. She lifted a palm to stop his retort. Yes, we did things together, but it wasn't like you ever told me that you liked me. Was I supposed to read your mind? Whenever you were uncomfortable about a topic, especially when it was about dating in any form, past or present, you would duck out of the conversation or change the subject. Nick was persuasive, actually making me feel guilty when I hesitated to make it exclusive. Deciding to date him was stupid. I know it now, but I didn't see it at first. Then you suddenly decided to kiss me, out of the blue. It had been a stupid move. Maybe if he had done it a couple months sooner. It didn't feel at all out of the blue to me. I wanted to show you how I felt, but I wasn't great with words then. Not that he was feeling like a linguistic giant at the moment. You were great with words, she corrected. You totally aced the poetry reading. That's different. They may have been my words, but they didn't come from my heart. I wasn't putting anything on the line. I risked something with you, and you rejected what I offered. I was humiliated, so I couldn't face you again. I was new to the area, I didn't get along with my roommates, and you abandoned me. And as soon as you were out of the picture, there was Nick, tearing my confidence to shreds. Drew kept his mouth shut so he wouldn't respond without thinking it through first. He had promised himself that he was going to listen this time, consider what she said, and face it. Today. You don't have anything else to say? She asked. Give me a minute. We obviously remember the past differently. I thought that I made it clear that I liked you. I spent practically every free minute with you. Had it all been his fault? Well, mostly been his fault, for not saying something sooner. It wasn't like he forced her to go out with Nick. That was on her. But the rest of it, had he been so bad at showing her what he felt? Or had she been bad at reading the signs? Or both? He had known Nick was a jerk, but he hadn't seen him with another girl enough to know he would tear her down like that. I can't be sure about how I was really acting, but I admit that I was scared to talk to you about us. You weren't like any of the other girls I had spent time with, and you were too young for the way you made me feel. I wasn't that young. He smiled, remembering the unusually innocent 18-year-old. Yeah, you were. Colette took his hand, her gaze searching his. How do you feel now? He had been trying to figure that out since the previous day. This could be his last chance, and he didn't want to lose her again. I think we could actually make this work. Seeing you again has shown me that I'm not really over you. He felt like his stomach was going to turn inside out and his heart was being slammed repeatedly by a lacrosse stick. Wow. Her response was as dry as fading autumn leaves. I feel positively blown away by all the love. I told you I'm not very romantic. No, you didn't. You said you don't believe Valentine's Day is about real romance. She paused and took in 2 deep breaths before finishing. I think you're probably a real romantic at heart. I thought so in college. I liked you then. A lot. But I was an idiot who gave up on getting your attention in that way just as Nick showed up, showering me with attention. It turns out that I still like you. A lot. I'm not sure if what I feel is a remnant of leftover feelings or if it's something we can actually build on. Drew was glad to at least have the truth. He figured he could work with that, one way or the other. Then maybe it's a good thing I have a wedding to go to, and you have a sister to sit and watch adrenaline-filled movies with. He picked up her hand and held it loosely. If you decide that you really want to see what's between us, let me know. Colette nodded, wetting her lips and drawing his attention. Okay, but I'll need your number for that. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket with her free hand. Drew typed in his phone number, address, and email, just to be thorough. He didn't want any excuse for her to not be able to reach him. He took down her information as well, fully intending to use it. They called the first boarding for her flight, and Drew looked up, surprised at the time. Where had it gone? He wasn't ready. Colette didn't leave him a few minutes later when they called out that they were boarding Zone 2, her zone of the plane. She did, however, finally stand. Drew joined her, taking her hand in his. Promise you're not going to forget me as soon as I'm out of sight? She asked. I promise. The woman at the counter announced. Boarding all zones for flight number 346 to Kansas City. Okay. Colette's gaze studied his face. Drew glanced up and saw there were only a handful of people still in line to board. He thought of the last time he had said goodbye to her, and of the awkward kiss he'd given her. At 22, he should have been a lot better at it, but she'd made him feel like he was 14 all over again. He felt an echo of that while he studied her face, trying to memorize it before he leaned down and gently pressed her lips with his. If this was all he ever got, then he would take it while he still could. Colette's arms came up around his waist and pulled him closer. The softness of her fingertips brushed against the nape of his neck, and he forgot momentarily about the crowds of people around them. Last call for flight number 346 to Kansas City. Drew pulled back, though he didn't want to. Go before you miss the flight. I'll call you, she said, grabbing the handle of her suitcase and adjusting the purse over her shoulder. I'll be waiting. She was the last one to enter the ramp. In the instant before they closed the door, Drew could have sworn he saw her looking back at him. Her plane hadn't even disconnected from the gangplank before he sent her a text message asking her to dinner the next weekend. Chapter 6. The crowds at the airport after Colette left seemed considerably thinner. Drew was almost sure it wasn't only because she was no longer there. Shortly after her plane touched down in Kansas City, she texted back that she was definitely up for dinner Saturday. He slept a few hours using his duffel bag for a pillow, then grabbed a bite to eat from the food court before returning to his terminal to wait for his new flight. He felt grimy and rumpled, and before they started boarding his plane, he sent his brother a text that he needed a shower first thing when he arrived. Keith popped back that Drew could have anything he wanted, and that someone would be waiting for him at the airport. Before the plane finished climbing to cruising altitude, Drew was asleep again. The chair was more comfortable than anything the airport had provided. Not that the terminal chairs were much of a standard to beat. Plus, he wasn't worried about someone walking off with his stuff or one of the kids. He didn't awaken until the captain announced that they would be landing in 10 minutes. "How long were you at that airport?" the old man beside him asked. "A day and a half." "Wow, I don't envy you. That must have been horrible." It would have been without Colette, but Drew didn't explain that to his neighbor, choosing to give the easy answer that it could have been worse. Flynn, one of his cousins, was waiting by the time Drew reached the baggage claim area. "You arrived alive," Flynn greeted. "You look a little worse for wear, though." "I feel it, too. I want a regular meal, a solid 20 minutes in the shower and 3 hours in a soft bed, or maybe 10. He still felt groggy from the long nap. "Can you settle for 2 out of 3? The bed will have to wait." Flynn took the duffel from him as they moved to the baggage claim area. "I'll take what I can get." Keith said the rehearsal went well. How was the bachelor party? Drew did his best to focus on his cousin and the wedding ahead, instead of letting his mind wander back to sitting on the airport floor playing slapjack with Colette. The shower was heaven. A bowl of frosted flakes never tasted so good, and the weather was beautiful. It was times like these when Drew seriously considered moving to Oregon, the way his brother was always coaxing him to. He felt his phone buzz in his pocket when he had donned his rented tux. He pulled it out to see a note from Colette. "I hope you made it safely to Oregon. Sarah is doing much better today. I miss you already." Drew grinned. "I'm here, showered, had a proper breakfast of cold cereal, and am dressed for the wedding. I think I might even be able to stay awake for the ceremony. Maybe. I wouldn't be unhappy with a picture of you in that tux. I hope your brother has a lovely wedding. I'll be sure to send the picture. Thanks. Take care. I better get moving, or someone is going to come up to find out why I'm not down there doing my job of best man." TTYL. Considering that a good sign, Drew slid his phone back in his pocket and headed down the stairs to the room where Keith was getting ready for the ceremony. "Wow, you look human. Flynn said you were pretty rough looking when he picked you up." Keith greeted him with a hug. "I'm glad you made it on time." "Me too." Drew hugged him back. "I still feel pretty ragged, but at least I don't smell like it anymore. You ready for this?" "Totally. This woman is amazing. Wait until you meet her." Drew was glad that even on his wedding day, Keith was still sure about his choice. He hoped to experience the same thing someday.
Chapter 7. A decent night's sleep in her own bed, a healthy breakfast, and some exercise had rejuvenated Colette, but she couldn't help looking at her watch and wondering what Drew was up to, how the wedding was going, and if he was struggling to keep his eyes open. After another long shower, Colette made a shopping list, rotated her laundry, and went out to run her errands. For the next 2 weeks, she'd be at home, training people who would be flying into her office. She was glad to be in a familiar place and to have a chance to think through her feelings for Drew. Spending 2 amazing days, 1.5, with someone she was sure she could love, gave her a better perspective on life. Everything in her snug little apartment seemed drabber. The weeks stretched out before her, and the time she had to get through before she could possibly see Drew again seemed never-ending. Darn 3-hour distance between their cities. She received a text message from Sarah at 3. The movies and cheesecake are waiting for whenever you get here." Colette shot back that she would be arriving soon, and then she stopped for a bunch of roses and to pick up the pizza she had pre-ordered. It wouldn't be the most romantic Valentine's ever, but considering the evening she had spent with Drew before boarding her rescheduled flight, she didn't feel deprived. "Happy Valentine's Day," she called to Sarah as she entered the house. "You seem awfully chipper for someone who spent almost 2 days in an airport." Sarah greeted her at the door and wrapped her in a hug. "What's not to be happy about? Did you get the movie?" "Sorry, it was already rented, but I did pick up the first 3 rush hours." "That will have to do." And it would fulfill Colette's quota for explosions and suspense beautifully. Sarah chatted away, obviously feeling much better a few days post-chemo. They watched the first movie, eating their way through half the pizza, then paused between movies to put the food away and get out the cheesecake Sarah had ordered from an amazing local bakery. "Why do you keep checking your phone?" Sarah asked, pausing the second movie. She looked worn out from the party, despite relaxing on the sofa most of the time. "I don't. I've only done it a few times." Colette slid the device into her pocket. The wedding would be over, the dinner at least in full swing if not finished, and she hadn't heard from Drew since that morning. "You've looked at it at least 10 times during this movie, and you're not responding to text messages. So what's going on?" When Colette had contacted Sarah from the airport in Denver, she had vaguely mentioned running into an old college friend, but Drew's name had never come up. She craved advice. "Drew. College Drew. He's the one I ran into in Denver." "Whoa, you spent all that time with Hunky Drew, and you didn't mention it before?" She set the remote on the table beside her. "How was it?" Colette slumped further into her comfy chair. "So good. Better than I remembered from college. Better than any relationship I've ever had. Of course, it was like a day, not really long enough to know anything, but still." "What's he up to?" Starting at the beginning of their encounter, Colette filled her sister in on the salient details of her time at the airport and about Drew's life. "So, you two swapped phone numbers, and what's going to happen now?" Their kiss before she'd left should have answered that question, but there were still a lot of questions. Distance and busy, fairly rigid schedules were not their friends. Even if they ended up making it work and decided they needed to live closer, who would move? In prosody equals 7%. Would he be willing to move to Crystal Creek so they could really get serious, or would she have to quit her job and move closer to him? "I don't know what's going to happen next. We decided to take some time to get to know each other. Wichita is pretty far away." "I always thought you should have chosen him instead of the jerk." Sarah had never been reticent about her feelings for Nick. Colette smiled, though it wasn't really funny. "I wish I had figured that out a lot sooner." "So is Drew going to call you?" "We have a date Saturday, but I hoped he'd find time to text me this evening. He's probably busy with the wedding stuff." Colette leaned back in her seat and looked at Sarah. She was pale and tired easily these days, and it was probably past her bedtime, but she hadn't said anything about needing to turn in. "So what's your plan?" "We'll date, we'll call and message and see where things go. I really want things to work." "It probably wouldn't hurt to figure out if leaving your job would be a deal breaker, if your relationship reaches that point. Knowing your deal breakers up front can help you both figure out what you can work around and what you can't." That was a good idea. "I knew you were the wise sister. Being married can be really fantastic, but it can also be really hard. If you know what you can and can't live with, it will make it easier to work out the rest." Colette was tempted to say that there were no deal breakers because spending time with Drew had been great. But until she gave herself a little time to breathe and figure out how she really felt when the first flush of love wasn't tainting every thought, she wouldn't be able to make a real evaluation. Maybe a little distance wouldn't be a horrible thing after all.
Chapter 8. Happy V-Day. How was your movie and junk food at Sarah's? It was fun and thought-provoking. She told me to think about my deal breakers and what would stop this relationship from being viable. I've never thought about it that way before. She's a wise woman. He hadn't been thinking about it that way either. In addition to her figuring out what she wanted, It would probably be good for him to do the same. What would he not be willing to give up to be with her? His brain was fuzzy from lack of sleep the past few days. He had left the wedding reception early, with Keith's blessing, to return to his hotel room. The party had been great, and he'd enjoyed seeing cousins and friends who had made the long trip into Portland, but he had reached the end of his reserves. Colette, it seems odd to me that I could spend so little time with you, just a weekend, and miss you anyway, but I do. Me too. Everything I used to feel seemed to flood back when I saw you. Same here. I could chat for hours, but you're probably exhausted. Unfortunately, yes. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My eyes are already drifting closed. Sweet dreams. He ended the texts, already thinking about talking to her in the morning.
Chapter 9. Great work, Colette. Colette's boss stopped her Wednesday on the way out of the day's training. She had 10 students from across the country in town for the week, learning about the company's software. Thanks, Bob. It had been a long few days. She'd been able to stay on task at work, but during breaks and every evening, she had been thinking about Drew, eyeing him, chatting with him on the phone or via text. She thought about their time together, a possible future, and what she really wanted. She couldn't wait until Saturday when she'd have another chance to see him. Then they would have to figure out how the heck to make a relationship work. I've been talking about you to the higher-ups, Bob continued. There's an opening in the Chicago office. More travel overseas, higher pay, and more room for advancement. It was what she had been working for only a week earlier, but looking at it now, she wasn't sure she wanted it anymore. Well, part of her wanted it, but the rest of her, not if it meant that she couldn't have Drew. That's great. Thanks for letting me know. Sarah referred to it as realizing what her deal breakers were, but the only thing Colette could think was that if she took the promotion, she wouldn't be able to see Drew. Pretty much ever, and she wasn't ready to make that decision yet. Colette made some polite social talk with her boss, then set things up for the next day's class. It was a 4-day training, so she could cut out of the office early Friday to go see Drew.
Chapter 10. Drew told his lacrosse team to clean up and hit the showers. It had been a crazy few days of tryouts, but he had his team picked out and would send the emails notifying the girls after he got home that night. Then he could put it all aside to focus on his Saturday date with Colette. Jason, his assistant coach, caught his eye and nodded toward the door. Anyone you know? She's definitely too young to be one of their moms. He turned to find Colette at the door to the gym. She was half in, half out of the room, as though she wasn't sure if she would be welcome. Yeah, I know her. Talk to you later. She was almost a whole day early, and in the wrong city. Did that mean she had decided to let him down in person? Colette started to speak before he reached her. I know I changed our plans, but I hit my 40 hours for the week at noon, so I cut out early to come down. I know you probably have things going on, but I hoped we could grab dinner together. And if you intended a quiet evening with your lesson plans, there's no reason we can't work in the same room. I have lesson plans to make too. She bit her lip, as though nervous he would turn her away. He was only partially relieved. He had been saving up his nerves for seeing her the next day, so they all seemed to attack him at once. I'd love that. Come see my room. I need to pick up a couple things from my desk anyway. He held out a hand to her, and she slid hers into it. Utter perfection. Drew asked about her class that week and how Sarah was doing as he turned through the empty halls to his classroom. He unlocked the door and ushered her in. This is my other domain. Colette stepped into the classroom, looking around her at the equipment in the adjacent lab and the huge poster of the periodic table of elements. You're really a chemistry teacher. She said this as if she hadn't believed it before. Yeah. Did you think I was making that up? No, it just seems odd, even though I know it shouldn't. You always did want to be a teacher. You're probably great at it. Colette walked over, her no-nonsense navy blue business suit ending in a skirt that fell an inch or two above her knees. Her legs were something he hadn't seen the previous weekend thanks to her long pants. She had great legs. Always had. He tore his gaze away and focused again on her face, the curiosity playing over her features. Though he hadn't expected her, and did have things to work on, he was really glad to see her. I didn't realize I was so irresistible that you'd have to drive down a day early to see me. She grinned. Well, you are. I figured if you were busy, I'd spend a little time driving around the city to get a feel for it, to decide how I would feel about being here a lot more if things go well for us. Oh? He set his clipboard on the desk and crossed to her, sliding his hands onto her waist. I really hope you start spending a lot more time here. Colette brushed her hands along his arms and up to his shoulders. I've been thinking this over all week, considering my deal breakers and what I didn't think I could live with before, but know now that I can. I told you about Sarah's cancer. Yes, well, she needs me now a lot. Right, of course. But that wouldn't last forever, right? So you need to stay in Crystal Creek. No, wait. She set a hand on his arm when he turned away, drawing his attention back to herself. You and I talked about figuring out our deal breakers. For the next little while, I need to be there for her. That doesn't mean that we can't date, but it does mean that her needs are going to have to be considered if we decide we need to move this relationship into a single city anytime soon, instead of us living hours apart. I know you have work here, and I'm not sure what my boss will say if I ask to work from here instead of Kansas City, but I might have to change jobs. Is that also a deal breaker? Drew studied her face while his insides tossed and turned with each sentence. He had thought about moving to the Kansas City area. Seeing her again, he knew he would do it if she wanted him to. Nope. It's the funniest thing, because I thought I would have a long list of things I wanted, that I needed if we were going to make this work. But I realized last night that I really don't. Other than being near Sarah for as long as she needs me, I'm all open to explore this. Whatever this is between us, even if it eventually means changing careers. How about you? Drew smiled, peace settling inside him. He brushed a lock of hair back from her cheek. How did she get such soft skin? He ran his thumb over her bottom lip. He had once obsessed over this mouth. He thought it would be very easy to start obsessing again. Colette, when it comes to being with you, there are no deal breakers for me. If you want me to move, I can do it. There's nothing I wouldn't do or change to grab another chance of having you be mine. He nuzzled her cheek before finding her mouth with his. Rockets went off. Or maybe that was something in his lab. He'd check that later.
Thanks for listening to Deal Breakers, a Crystal Creek sweet romance novella. Please like this story to help others find it, and subscribe to be notified when I post other sweet romance or romantic suspense stories. Hope to see you soon.